1, 2, 3, 4, 5
On the floor.
Welcome to 5 on the Floor, a daily show on the Miami Heat and the NBA featuring Ethan Skolnick with Alex Toledo and Greg Sylvander, part of the 5 Reasons Sports Network.
All right, welcome into 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Here is today's floor plan. We continue with our off-season episodes. Make sure to check out our 5-part series about the Pat Riley press conference. We covered a lot of the key players on the team. We finished with Robinson, Nunn, and Dragic in the last episode. That one's getting a lot of play on our feed, so make sure that you check that one out. A lot of opinions about that. Before we start today's episode, Greg, I will allow you to weigh in on this because there's been a big debate on Twitter. What qualifies as Miami?
Oh, I mean, I said it to you in the comments, and I think it applies. Actually, I've had a few people hit me up in the DMs and say that I think, even geographically accurate in saying that anything north of Aventura Mall is no longer Miami.
I'm gonna go further south, and I'm further north. I live a block away from Las Olas, so I'm a Lauderdale boy now. I'm gonna say it's actually a little bit further south. I think Ives Dairy. I would go 1 or 2 exits further south.
Yeah,
I think to me Aventura is Broward. I mean it's Broward, right? It's Broward.
I think it's right on the county line on the Dade County side.
I mean, I don't want to claim it in Broward. I hate that mall, but you try to get in and out of that mall like well, you don't live down here anymore, but I mean, trying to get in and out of that mall like at rush hour. That's nuts.
I know. I mean, the only thing that brings back worse memories is 163rd Street Mall. But let me not show my age too much.
No, that one's bad. But yeah, Ives Dairy trying to get off the exit at 995 is just, let's just say, I don't know. There's a certain establishment that Paul George and others frequent. I think we're going to make that the line of demarcation. That's a little bit more Miami Gardens. All right, let's get to the episode today. We're going to do 3 or 4 of these as well. We're trying to package some stuff in the series. Barry Jackson wrote a piece for the Herald. We actually teased this before Barry wrote it. So, Barry, if you're listening, we appreciate it. If you weren't listening, we had the same damn idea. So here we go. We're going to take a look at kind of best of the worst case scenarios for the Heat. Like, that's what we're calling this. The best of the bad scenarios, the best of being down bad. The Heat were not supposed to be in a position in 2021 where they were going to have to take someone else's leftovers, and they may still not have to. Okay, but obviously we're about ready to watch Giannis play here as we do this podcast in Game 4 of the second round. He was supposed to be a member of the Miami Heat next year, according to a lot of people, as were others. But really, it's Kyle Lowry and a bunch of nothing as free agents in 2021. So we're going to take a look at some of the players who could be available to the Heat that maybe they could resurrect their career, expensive players that their current teams may not want anymore, but could pair with some of the current players of the team. And we've talked about it. It's Bam and it's Jimmy and it's everybody else. Okay. So these are guys that you could put in there with Bam and with Jimmy. We're going to start with the front court today. And actually Barry covered one of these guys in his piece. Happens to be the one that I kind of like the best actually, but we'll talk about it. We're going to talk about 4 players in particular, 4 front court players who could give the Heat some of what they lacked this last season, but all of them would be they're scratched up assets at this point. Okay, they have to be fixed up. Kristaps Porzingis of the Dallas Mavericks, who just I think averaged 3 rebounds in their first round series loss to the Clippers. Al Horford, who was kind of pushed out in Boston and then Philadelphia and then in OKC. Was playing pretty well actually with a young team, and then was kind of told to go away in part because he was playing too well. They were trying to lose more games, and he had a good relationship with Sam Presti, and he accepted it. They went public with it and all that. Kevin Love, people know my personal opinion about Kevin Love as a player. We're going to get into him, but obviously the Cleveland situation, they continue to sort of rebuild eternally. Kevin Love had a couple of situations this year where it didn't look like he was on the same page, including one where he inbounded to no one. And then sort of a fourth guy who doesn't have quite as high a profile, hasn't been an all-star like the other 3 have, but that's Steven Adams, who was picked up by David Griffin, I think in a move that they came to regret with New Orleans. Does not seem like the best fit next to Zion. So we're going to go through these 4 guys. Porzingis, of course, adds, a stretch player. When he's at his best, he can be a top scorer. Again, can be a little bit lazy as a rebounder or a defender. Al Horford offers intelligence, can stretch the floor still, is a very good positional defender, not a shot blocker. Kevin Love, we know what he used to offer. He was a premium rebounder and scorer back in the day. Still can be dangerous from the three-point line. I'm not sure he offers some of the other stuff that he used to. And then Steven Adams is basically a big body rebounder, essentially. We saw the value of that in a guy like, guy just patrol the paint, guy like a Brook Lopez. We saw the value of that against the Heat. So let's take a look at these four. And of course, the Heat need all of that. They need a stretch player in the front court. They need more intelligence in the front court to pair with Bam. They could use stretch player, which, as I mentioned, Kevin Love would be that also. And he and Steven Adams are both plus rebounders. So let's start here with the number one, I think, on people's list, Kristaps Porzingis. What is his contract status, Greg? And I guess, can he be redeemed?
So his contract status, this would be the biggest investment of the guys that we're discussing today, but also would come with maybe the biggest amount of hope, trafficking components, with him. And so essentially he is owed $31.6 million next season. And that contract runs through technically 2024, but in 2023, he does have a player option, a $36 million player option. So, I mean, you would think as he's trending, he's going to pick that up, but we've seen guys have resurrections and then think that they can get 4 more years at a high number. So he could opt out, but ultimately you're looking at if they were to bring on Porzingis, it would be definitively the third guy from a salary perspective. And maybe even, if you factor in Lowry, it can end up that you'd have 4 big salary players when you think about him. But I'll flip it back to you here because I'm interested to hear your perspective on Porzingis, because I feel like of all these guys, he's the one at 25 years and 11 days old that if you could revive him, he's the guy that has the most upside. Ethan, do you disagree with that?
Not from an age perspective, no. I'm in a weird position on Porzingis because actually I alienated his, I think then agent, I don't know if it's still his agent, Andy Miller, on the very first day of Summer League because he was getting pushed around in the paint in his first game, and I kind of overreacted to a Summer League game and went off on him a little bit in a piece for Bleacher Report, and his agent decided to never speak to me again. So I have a little bit of a again, twisted view of him as I may have Kevin Love. Clearly the skill set is there. I think, and again, you mentioned the upside from an age perspective. I think the biggest issue with Porzingis to me is he a Heat player? I think that Al Horford and Steven Adams are Heat players. Like Al's a guy that the Heat have been in on before. And obviously there's relationships and Al's father and everything else and playing down here in Miami. I mean, there's a comfort level with Al. Like Al is the type of guy like Eric Spoelstra would immediately trust. Like he's an Iguodala, he's an Ariza, he's a Battier. Al is the type of player who finishes his career with Miami. Like that, like he is. Point. He's just a quality person. Everybody, Al is Al. Okay. And Steven Adams has a Heat persona. I mean, he plays hard. Okay. The other two guys, and we'll touch on Love separately because Love may be somewhat a product of circumstance. But with Porzingis, there are legitimate questions here. He doesn't ever seem to be happy. There were the reports that came out from, I think it was Tim McMahon, who to me, other than Mark Stein, is the most credible reporter on Dallas.
Mavericks, for sure.
Right. And he's always been extremely plugged in there. And he reported that Porzingis was not happy sort of not being treated as an equal co-star to Luka Doncic, which is sort of ludicrous.
Crazy.
So I wonder about that. And also the Heat just got into this thing with a guy who, from a reputation and personality standpoint, has some similarities to Porzingis in Oladipo. And it didn't work out also that well. Another guy with an injury history. I don't know that chapter is closed at this point, but it seems to be closing. And just an attitude about maybe being a little bit more about himself than about the team. So I wonder about that. I do think from an age and a skill set perspective, he does make the more sense of these four. I mean, he's closer to Bam's window than Jimmy's, but he helps during Jimmy's window.
Yeah, he like bridges the gap. And you know, like to your point about him being a Miami Heat player, that was something that that hit me in the gut too. But I remember back to slightly before he was traded from New York to Dallas. If you guys remember, he was traded to Dallas with Courtney Lee, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Trey Burke for Dennis Smith Jr., Wes Matthews, DeAndre Jordan, and 2 first-round picks, one of which is unprotected, 2021 first-round pick. And I had heard that Miami essentially threw all the players they could at New York to get Porzingis, but didn't have the picks. Shocker. So because they were interested then, at least by virtue of what I heard, it leads me to believe that at least they wanted to take a shot. Now, maybe that has changed, but I think you're right that probably a guy like Al Horford, as we pivot to other guys on this list, is probably a better fit and also a shorter term investment.
Right. That's the other thing. I mean, this would be a longer investment for them. And it would have to be a player that Jimmy vibed with, right? Like that's part of it. Now, I do think having Bam there to cover up for the fact that Porzingis defensively may not be as active as you would like, but does provide somewhat of a rim deterrent. I think that there could be a fit there. I just wonder about the Jimmy Porzingis personality fit. Seems a little awkward to me. But again, I mean, look, Jimmy's played with guys before that you wouldn't think it would work, but I don't know. I mean, it didn't work with Karl Anthony Towns necessarily, who's to me a more gifted version of Porzingis. So that would be where I would raise the questions. I could definitely see the upside play. I can see Spoelstra envisioning, a way to unlock some things with. I mean, the talent is sort of unquestioned. I mean, the talent is there. I mean, he can score in space. He can play near the rim. He has been a good rebounder at times. That disintegrated, during that playoff series. And defensively, there is a skill set there that they could at least work with. But again, I just wonder, is he a Heat guy? And again, I think what we also need to frame with all this is, what are we looking at in terms of sending there, right? Yeah. Like, okay, so let's start there before we pivot to Al.
Good call. I was trying to go too quickly to Al Horford because I like elements of the trades that we've talked about there, at least that have been floating around. Porzingis at $31 million. Essentially, the question is, what would Dallas want in return, and how depressed of an asset? We've used this term depressed asset, which sounds weird to talk about humans that way, but for we're talking about it in terms of basketball. If it was Goran and Iggy, like that's what you sent, the 2 team options, you pick them up and you send it. And like, essentially that's it. Maybe with a smaller asset of some kind, I could see that being something that maybe Miami thinks about, but anything more than that, I just think you can't turn in any more picks unless you're really sure about it.
Well, let's rank as we go through this. Let's rank in order of how desperate each of the current teams that has the player is to get rid of the player, right? How would you rank that? Because it didn't feel like OKC was desperate to get rid of Al. They just
no. Again, I mean, as long they can just keep him away. So it's
right,
like,
they keep him away, and at this point they could play him. I mean, I know that they played Moses Brown and some others, but I mean they could play him. I feel like Cleveland wants to be done with Kevin Love. Right.
Yeah. That feels buyout-ish to me, though. I feel like the trade thing would have happened a long time ago if it was really going to materialize. And Steven Adams, I mean, for all the talk of what he may not be, he's still 27 years old and still.
God, he feels older than that. Yeah.
I mean, I just feel like you can make him work, and he kind of, you know what you're going to get from him. So to me, there's almost an element of this in a weird way where I feel like the most pressure is on Dallas because they have to surround Luka with more talent immediately. They have the flexibility to kind of shake things up and make a splash. So to me, I feel like the most pressure is on them. I don't know if it's to move Porzingis in a vacuum, but it's to make something change.
Well, how does the trade work from their perspective? Say you're sending, I mean, they do need another point guard. I mean, they have, and there were reports that they may get in on Lowry, but I think Lowry's going to determine his own fate. But they need a point guard so that Luka doesn't have to play point guard all the time. So, I mean, Goran has made sense in Dallas forever. I mean, but then they didn't want him, which made no sense. But I would think at this point now that Luka is, developed enough of a power, play inside the organization. He has enough status that if he says, if there's 2 trades on the table and one is going to get him Goran Dragic for a year, right, on the opt-in,
and the other's going to get player X, he's going
right. He's gonna push for them to take the Heat deal, right? Like, and if you're Cuban and Carlisle, or Donnie Nelson, if he's still making decisions there, you take the deal that Luka wants, right? We've talked about that a lot with Jimmy, except it's even more important with Luka. Like he's signing the extension this offseason, as he said, right? $200 million. So if that's the case, then then the Goran package may interest them. I don't know that you have to sweeten it with anything. Honestly, I don't really know that the Heat have anything to sweeten it with, right? I mean, that's
precious.
I guess. I mean, extra big. Maybe they want to take a flyer on KZ. As they don't really have a ton of athleticism on that team. I guess Finney Smith, and I mean they don't really have a lot. So maybe KZ is somebody that would interest them as a developmental project. But I guess as we move to Al next. My thing on Porzingis is I do agree with you of the 4 because of age and because of skill set. I do think he has the most upside. I think it is something where they would have to make sure he's a cultural fit, even more so than the injury history. Now, I don't know with the injuries. I mean, he had the knee. Carlisle put it out there that it's the healthiest he's been. I feel like that was, again, sort of what Pat was doing with Hero, where you're trying to prime an asset a little bit, but I don't know. I just, again, the talent base is there culturally, physically. Is it worth it? If you're not planning on like giving Goran big money anyway, and that's going to become an issue, and we know Iggy is probably not going to be here next year anyway, then it might make sense. The other thing is you could potentially look at, we've talked about the Josh Richardson thing, right? I mean, I mean, you could increase the package in some way and bring Josh back. I mean, Josh has the opt-in that he could decide to do, which is what, $11 million? Is that right? So
yeah, and I think he will. I mean, like he kind of really cratered at the end of the season, and the Heat also love Dorian Finney-Smith. I mean, that was one of their undrafted targets too.
But so, I don't know that they would move. I don't know that.
Agreed. I know we are opening too big of a can of worms.
Yeah, I don't know that they would move him, but I do think if they moved Josh, and you expand the package somehow, that maybe that would make some sense. Because again, if you're trading Iguodala, you're keeping Ariza, Josh becomes the Iguodala replacement essentially, right? I mean, that's as your wing defender. All right, we are going to get to the rest of these guys as we go. We promise. Just wanted to kind of sort of set the stage there with everything else.